Hello YouTube modelers, this is Dwayne, Doozer's Models. So a couple of months back I had my 300 plus sub giveaway, and Mark over at Red 13 was the lucky winner of a CUDA kit that he decided. I had 5 to choose from. He chose the CUDA and he asked me to paint it like it was on the box with the silver bottom and the blue top, and so that's what I did. I shipped it off to him, and when he got it he thanked me, of course, so much appreciated. And he asked me how I did the two-tone. He was a little bit apprehensive, a little bit nervous about doing two-tones, and he asked me how I did it. I told him instead of typing it, because I'm lazy, I would do a video on how I do two-tones and things to think about and stuff that goes on when you're doing them. Now, the first thing I want to clarify is I by no means consider myself a professional painter. I don't think I'm any better than most of the guys out there. In fact, there's a lot of guys on YouTube that I can't hold a candle to that are absolutely amazing painters and have great finish and do two-tones and custom stuff. I mean, those lowrider guys that do the multi-colors and all that, I mean, amazing stuff. I wouldn't even dream of attempting that. So again, I just don't want to sit here and think I'm better than anybody else or anything, but I do have some things that I do that might be useful to the beginners that are out there. Maybe even some of you seasoned veteran guys might pick up a thing or two, might remember a thing or two, hopefully something you can implement. If nothing else, then hope you enjoy the video as it is. So the first thing that I want to say is when you're doing a two-tone paint job, before you start anything, have a plan. Like my grandma used to always say, a failure to plan is like planning to fail, and like grandmas are, they're always right. So the reason you want to do that is you want to make sure that the colors that you pick go well together, that they complement each other. If you're using different paint brands, that they play nice together. Some paints work well with others. Other paints just wrinkle and curl and crease and do all kinds of crazy things. When possible, I strongly suggest that you stick with the same color, the same manufacturer through the process. If possible, you minimize your potential for problems. Most of the things that I'm going to talk about today are focused on minimizing problems, minimizing error, making it as foolproof as you possibly can. Now, with that said, I've done it in times where every step was done meticulously, done perfectly, done as well as I can do, and I've still had failures. So don't beat yourself up if it fails, or if you do something once and it works great and you do it a second time and it doesn't work. These things happen, and there's nothing you can do about it. So the first thing that I want to talk about is body prep. The first thing that you need to do is you need to make sure that you clean the body thoroughly and that you sand it thoroughly. Now, I use sanding paper, I use sanding sticks, I use sanding foam. All three have different reasons and different applications. You use different grits. I like to start off with a 600 or 800 grit to get a nice rough scuff on it. Then I usually do a 1000 grit or a 1200, and then I do my primer. Now, when you're going to do a two-tone, again, the planning part comes into play. The areas where you're going to mask off, those are the areas that you have to thoroughly sand. You can't just wash it and start praying, because that's where you're going to get your paint lifting. That's where you're going to get your paint peeling. So your first thing is a quality primer. My favorite go-to primer is Tamiya Surface Primer. It's a little on the pricey side, but to me, it gives me the best results. I've also used Stynylrez primer when I'm working with acrylics and some of the, whatever you call these things. I never use these things, but anyways, you can use automotive primer. Just about any primer works. Again, you find what you're happy with. So you prime the entire body, get a nice even coat of primer, and then you sand the primer. This part I like to use the sanding sponge. I usually use 1000 or 1500, maybe a 2000. And again, focus on making sure you sand the areas where you're going to mask off and have your two-tone. So then you take your color, and generally rule of thumb is you spray your lightest color first, and then you spray your darker colors after that. that you don't have to do that. Sometimes it's more efficient to mask a certain area. It's easier to mask one side off than the other, and unfortunately one side's darker or lighter. I'm just saying, when you're doing your planning, if possible, go light color first and then dark color. So this particular model, I sprayed the entire model with the gray. It was a Gravity Colors gray, and then I masked off along this line, and then I sprayed, again, Gravity Color green on the top. And of course I did the vinyl top and all the other stuff. That's different. Now, when masking, you've got several options. You've got Tamiya fine line tape, awesome product. You've got generic Autobody fine line tape, again, awesome product. A product that I like to use is actual pinstripe tape. You can get this ultra fine. It works great, it bends good, it's very pliable. I find it very good to use. If I'm covering over, I also use regular Tamiya tape, and I also use masking tape. And I have a product that I use at work. This is called Etchmark, and this is a vinyl that they put on like pantry windows or shower doors or that sort of stuff. It's a self-adhesive vinyl. It's supposed to simulate an etched look. But the nice part about this stuff is it's very pliable and very bendable. So if I had a multiple area on here that I wanted to cut or whatever, I would lay this on it and then I would cut it away with a knife. You have to be very careful that you don't cut through to the body, but the nice part about this stuff is you scar it really lightly and it peels away really clean, and it's great for masking. So if you're going to do scallops or flames or some sort of a detail like that, you do that. Another product that's kind of neat is this masking here with the plastic. The part that a lot of people make the mistake of is if they were taping this off, they tape the whole thing off. Well, what that's doing is that's adding area that could potentially peel or lift or so on. So what I try to do is minimize the amount of masking that's touching the body. So if I can mask off one thin line tight to get my nice crisp line, and then I can lay some other Tamiya on it, just barely laying it on, and then I can run a bead of this and wrap the plastic around it, or take a shower bag or a sandwich bag or just cellophane, any of that plastic. Minimize the amount of contact. You minimize the amount of areas where you're going to have fail or peel. So if you sand the area where you're going to put the tape down good, you scuff the rest of the area, you put your tape down and you go, you're going to have pretty good results. Now, a couple other things that intimidate people is, I'll backtrack a little bit. Another thing to do is when you're going to do a two-tone, do your test on a spoon. This is going to tell you if the light color will cover the dark color, how it's going to look, if the two paints react properly. It's just a great way of going about it. So anytime you're going to do a two-tone, do a test, paint over paint. It'll give you a true representation of what the color is going to look like together, and you're going to find out whether you're going to get a reaction or not. So that's very important. Now, the other part, other than the paint peeling and lifting off, is bleed. So a lot of times areas like your door jamb or your front, or areas where it's going over a multiple curve, if you don't get the mask down properly, you could have bleed issues. There's a few ways to minimize the bleed issues. One way is when you get your paint line on here, you take your airbrush and you do a light mist of the gray along there, because that way anything that's going to bleed is gray bleeding onto gray. So that's going to minimize your problem. The second option is to spray a little bit of clear. You take some of your clear and you spray it on there. That way, again, if you're going to get any bleed, your bleed is going to be clear. So you minimize that green, over gray bleeding. There's another product out there that is really, really good for curing paint, for giving you a surface to mask over, and to minimize the bleed. It's made by House of Color, and it's called Intercoat Clear. You take Intercoat Clear and you mix it with reducer, as it says here, 2:1, and you can spray over just about any paint, and it gives you a matte clear finish. And what it does is it gives you a stable working station, so you're not jeopardizing the paint underneath. So if you do have any bleeds, or you do have any peels, or you have any issues, you've got a layer that you can sand, or it helps it cure, it helps it protect it. it's just a really great product to use if you can afford it, if you can work it into your system, and you go on that. So the other part that people ask is, how soon can I mask? How long do you need it to dry? How do you handle it? What do you do? So on and so forth. The one thing I can say is, when you're doing two-tone paint jobs, don't be in a rush. It's one thing you don't want to rush. Rule of thumb with paint, what I utilize is the smell test. If you can still smell the paint, it's still curing, it's still gassing off, and it shouldn't be handled, and it certainly shouldn't be masked. If you have the luxury of having a dehydrator, that can speed the process up. If you don't, and you got to let it air dry, put a container over it, keep the dust off it, do what you can to make it clean, but give it the time it needs to dry. So with that being said, that's part of planning, that's part of knowing your paint, okay? So when you use House of Color paint, within an hour, House of Color is dry, handleable, you can mask it, you can do whatever. I like to give it 24 to 72 hours per coat, just because I err on the side of caution, and I'm in no hurry. I've got 30 models on the go. Some of them are half painted, some of them are first colors done, but the other isn't. It's not uncommon for me to paint the gray, put it back in the box, and leave it there for a month. But if you're in a hurry to get it done and you're doing your stuff, again, know your paint. So Splash and Gravity are very similar to House of Color. They dry quite rapidly. They're good to go. To me, a spray can, I don't like to use a spray can when doing two-tone because I like that control. I like to be able to just mist it lightly along the seam line and gradually build it up. Again, to minimize the raise difference of the line, and also to eliminate bleed and different factors. But this stuff here takes several days to dry, so you can't just go at it right away. Alclad takes a little bit to dry. I find the scale finishes, some of them dry quite rapidly, some of them take up to a week. So again, the smell test, if I can still smell it, it's still curing out. Zero paint's a good paint, but it's a little bit on the hot side, so sometimes that's a great one to use intercoat with. It's definitely, you need to test it. If you spray a hot paint over a not hot paint, you're going to have curl and wrinkle issues. A lot of you guys use this stuff, the water-based, non-toxic acrylic paints. I myself don't use them. I've had little to no success with them. I have lots of money invested in quality paints that I prefer to use. But for you guys that do use this and do like it, by all means, use it. The one thing I can say is the body prep with the sanding is crucial with this stuff. It tends to turn into like a little plastic coat, and if you don't have a good base for it to bite into, it's going to peel off when you peel your mask off. There's no two ways about it. It's going to happen. So again, this is a good product to use Intercoat or another clear between. So you spray your body with this, you let it dry for a couple of days, you shoot it with a clear coat, you let it dry for a couple of days, you scuff that, and then you spray your second color over it. You should have little to no problem spraying this stuff over clear coat as long as it's cleared. So that's just a few touches of things that I use. I also use a couple of different liquid masks when applicable. Sometimes they're helpful. Sometimes you need little areas that you know you can't reach with tape or can't fill in. So I'll use a little bit of liquid mask occasionally. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I have used it in the past. So any paint you use is fine. Do your planning beforehand. Think it out. Make sure you've got all the resources that you need before you start doing it. And don't be in a rush. Two-tone paint jobs take time. You're not going to do them in a day. I mean, some of those guys using the Gravity, they mask them off and use the Intercoat and they blast them off in a day. I tend to take a little bit longer. So hopefully if you found this useful, give me a thumbs up, give me a comment back and forth. If you've got anything to add to the process that you do, by all means, add it in the comments below. I think other people read those comments too, and so if I miss something or if there's a step that you do, or if you disagree with something I do. Feel free to voice your experience and let everybody know. Again, I don't profess to be a professional painter. I don't think I'm any better than anybody else. Mark asked me to give him a little bit of a tutorial on how I do two-tone painting. This is how I do two-tone painting, and it's given me pretty good success so far. I've had lots of failures. I've had lots of mistakes to get to this point, so it didn't just happen overnight. So don't expect your first one to be perfect. It's a trial and error thing. Definitely do the spoon test. Definitely take your time. Definitely think it through and enjoy the process. So yeah, so for those of you that stuck around for 16 minutes, which is about 3 times longer than I think I've done most of my videos, I appreciate you watching till the end. I hope it was helpful to somebody. Thanks again, guys. Build on. Have a good weekend.